Imagine a secret history, not one carved in stone monuments or taught in school books, but one written in fading ink on brittle, yellowed paper. It's a history whispered in the rustle of turning pages, hidden in the dark, silent vaults of newspaper archives. For every headline that shouted of war and invention and triumph, there were other stories tucked away on page 7, below the fold. Stories that spoke of things that didn't quite fit, of shadows that moved against the grain of a confident modern age. Tonight, we're going to pull 2 such stories from the dust, from the archives of the San Francisco Call and the Chicago Tribune, from the years 1896 and 1897, a tale unfolds. It begins not with a bang, but with a slow, creeping dread in the fog-shrouded streets of San Francisco. And it ends. Well, we don't truly know how it ends. That is the heart of the horror. Our story starts in the winter of 1896. San Francisco was a city of stark contrasts. On the hills, the mansions of the silver and railroad barons glittered with electric light, a new and wondrous invention. But down below, in the districts like the Barbary Coast, the fog pooled thick and permanent, a damp, chilling blanket that smothered the sounds of the wharves and carried the smells of salt, sewage, and sin. It was in this world of shadows that a policeman, Officer Patrick Reardon, made a routine patrol along the waterfront. The air was cold enough to bite, and the gas lamps did little more than create halos of sickly yellow light in the gloom. It was then he saw it, a figure, or rather the suggestion of one, moving through a narrow alley between 2 warehouses. At first, he thought it was a drunk or a sailor who'd lost his way, but the way it moved, it was wrong. It didn't walk so much as it shuffled with a stiff, unnatural gait, as if its joints were made of rusted metal. And it was tall, impossibly so, its head seeming to bob just at the upper edge of the lamplight. Reardon called out, his voice swallowed by the fog. "You there! Halt!" The figure stopped. It did not turn. It simply stopped, frozen. Reardon, his hand on the butt of his revolver, advanced. He was 10 feet away when the smell hit him. A sweet, cloying, and yet profoundly foul odor, like rotting flowers mixed with the metallic tang of old blood. He described it later in a report that would be buried in the precinct logs before finding its way, weeks later, into a brief and skeptical paragraph in the San Francisco Call. He said the figure was wearing a long, tattered coat, slick with damp, and its hands, hanging at its sides, were pale and waxy, the fingers too long. But it was the face, or the lack thereof, that haunted him. As he drew closer, the figure slowly, deliberately began to turn its head. There were no features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth oval expanse of that same waxy, pale flesh, like a candle that had melted and reset. Officer Riordan, a veteran of street brawls and knife fights, felt a primal fear seize him. He drew his weapon, his breath pluming in the air. The thing took a single, lurching step towards him, and then the fog swirled, thick and sudden, and when it cleared, the alley was empty. Only that foul, sweet smell remained, lingering for a few moments before the sea wind tore it away. The report was dismissed. Riordan was a good man, but perhaps he'd been drinking. The stress of the job, the fog placed tricks on the mind. That was the official line, but Riordan knew what he saw, and he wasn't the only one. Over the next few weeks, other reports trickled in from the foggy edges of the city. A night watchman at a cannery who saw a tall, faceless man standing on a pier staring out at the black water. A prostitute on Pacific Avenue who fled in terror after a client, a silent man in a long coat, revealed his featureless face in the flicker of a match.
The stories were fragmented, whispered, never making the front page. They were the city's dark, secret gossip. Now, we shift our gaze east, to Chicago, the summer of 1897. If San Francisco was a city of ancient fog and new money, Chicago was the brutal, beating heart of American industry. It was a city of stockyards and steel mills, of grime and grandeur, still rebuilding its body, but not its spirit after the Great Fire. And here, in this city of sweat and ambition, a different kind of fear began to take root. It started in the tenements. The Chicago Tribune, on July 18, 1897, ran a small, curious article headlined, "A Peculiar Malady." It spoke of several families, all living in a single, overcrowded block on the west side, reporting the same bizarre symptoms. They complained of a profound, unshakable lethargy. They spoke of waking up more tired than when they went to sleep, their limbs heavy as lead. And they all reported the same dream. A tall, dark figure would stand in the corner of their room, watching them. It never moved, it never spoke. But as they slept, they could feel it, feeding. Not on their blood, but on their very energy, their vitality.
One woman, an Irish immigrant named Bridget O'Shea, gave a particularly chilling account to a Tribune reporter. She said the figure had no face, just a smooth, blank sheet of skin. She said the room would grow cold and a strange, sweet smell, like spoiled perfume, would fill the air. Her children were listless, their cheeks pale. The doctors were baffled. They diagnosed anemia, nervous exhaustion, the effects of bad air. But the people in the tenements knew it was something else. They called it the fetch man, a name pulled from old country folklore, a spectral parasite that fed on the living. The Chicago articles were brief, but they were there. A doctor, quoted anonymously, expressed a chilling theory. He didn't believe it was a ghost or a demon. He speculated it was a man, or something that had once been a man, suffering from a rare and monstrous medical condition, a condition that forced it to subsist on the vital energies of others, a human vampire not of blood, but of life force. The theory was ridiculed by his peers, but the reports continued. A factory worker on the night shift was found unconscious in the washroom, claiming a tall, faceless man in a workman's coat had cornered him and he'd felt a sudden, draining weakness before passing out. The description was always the same. Tall, tattered coat, long, pale hands, and no face. 2 cities, 2 coasts, separated by 2,000 miles of prairie, mountain, and desert. There was no internet, no telephone in every home. News traveled by telegraph and by rail, slowly. The police in San Francisco had no reason to speak to the doctors in Chicago.
But if someone had laid the pages of the San Francisco Call and the Chicago Tribune side by side, a pattern would have emerged. A terrifying, impossible pattern. The dates. The San Francisco sightings ended in the late spring of 1897. The Chicago incidents began in early summer. Something, or someone, had traveled from the Pacific coast to the heart of the Midwest. The journey itself is a void in our story, a blank space on the map where anything could have happened. Did it travel by rail, hiding in a freight car, a silent, motionless shape amidst the crates and cattle? Did it walk, following the new steel rails like a pilgrim following a sacred path, its featureless face turned towards the rising sun? We can only imagine the lonely train depots in the dead of night, the isolated farmsteads where perhaps the dogs howled at something unseen passing by, the small towns where a solitary traveler might have been glimpsed for a moment under a station lamp before vanishing into the darkness, leaving behind only a faint, sweet, and rotten smell. And what was it? The old folklore of nearly every culture has its versions of the energy vampire. The Alp of Germany, the Mara of Scandinavia, creatures that sit upon the chests of sleepers and steal their breath. Was this some hideous physical manifestation of that ancient fear? Or was it, as that anonymous doctor feared, a man? A victim of some grotesque medical experiment, perhaps, or a sufferer of a rare disease like leprosy that had ravaged his features, coupled with a psychological aberration that made him a psychic predator. We will never know for certain. The records are incomplete. The story, like so many from that time, simply stops. The Chicago reports faded away by the autumn of 1897. The fetchman, the faceless stranger, vanished from the headlines as quickly as he had appeared. There was no dramatic confrontation, no body discovered in a rail yard. He simply melted back into the tapestry of American shadows. Perhaps he moved on again, to New York, with its millions of souls, to the deep, isolated hollows of Appalachia. Or perhaps he finally died. His unnatural hunger finally sated, or his stolen life force at last expended. But the story doesn't offer us that comfort. The true horror of the archives is not in a conclusive ending, but in the lack of one. It's in the knowing that for a few months in two of America's greatest cities, something walked among the living. Something that had no face, that moved with a broken rhythm, and that fed on the very essence of human vitality. It's a ghost story, but one written not in folklore, but in the stark, factual prose of the daily newspaper. A reminder that the past is not a safe, well-lit room. It is a vast, dark attic. And if we are brave enough, or foolish enough, to open the old trunks and unroll the brittle parchment, we might find things we were never meant to see. Things that, perhaps, are still out there, waiting in the fog, or standing in the dark corner of a room, just beyond the edge of the lamplight.